It's Saturday evening, and I made it here safely after a long trip. I've took off from Dayton at about 7 o'clock last night and made it to Amsterdam, what would have been about 6 o'clock in the morning our time, but it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon their time. And so got picked up by some of the Bible school students and brought back to the school here and had a chance to get a little bit of rest, and then had dinner and fellowship with the students. I love getting to know the students here and to hear how they got attached to the school, how they came to Christ, and what God has put in their hearts for the future. There's a young family that went through this year, husband and wife and their 2 kids that are going to be missionaries to Ecuador. And so it's exciting to be able to see what God's doing here in this generation. And this is the first time I'm speaking. This is actually the last week of the Bible school for this year. And so I'm at the very end. This is going to be the last week of training. And so I'm looking forward to being able to pour into these students. 2 of the young ladies that are here were actually at a camp that Leander and I spoke at last time I was here 2 years ago. And they responded to what they felt like was God's call to come to the Bible school. And so it's been exciting to see them again. And just looking forward to a good church service in Ermelo in the morning. I've never been there, but I'll spend most of the day in fellowship with those believers there at that church. And so then we're going to get into a busy schedule this week, and just anticipating God's got a plan. He always does. And excited to see what he's going to do. It's Sunday evening, and this morning I got picked up by a couple from a church about a half an hour away in Ermelo, and I had a great time with this church. It was a vibrant church with a lot of young people, lots of young families. They try really hard to have a tight community atmosphere, and so once they grew to 100, they actually split the church off and have a sister church because they never want to get too big for community. And so every week they get together, have communion. We did that at 9 o'clock this morning. I love taking communion because I realize that even though the service might look a little different, the elements might look a little different, all around the world, it's something you can break bread and take the cup with believers in all different places. And it symbolizes the unity in the body of Christ, that no matter what kind of background and culture and upbringing we have, and even denominational differences, we can all sit there at the table and we can take communion together. So it was really a beautiful time. I spoke to on the message of Matthew 11 and 12, the stories that Jesus clashed with the Pharisees over the Sabbath. And I talked about Sabbath keeping, what that meant in a Jewish context, and how Jesus emphasized in those stories that the spirit behind the law of mercy and the freedom God was offering people is so much more important than obeying the letter, and how the Pharisees had a religious spirit, and how all of us as Christians can get that way. Sometimes we do the external and we do the outward ritual without letting the intimacy inside be the most important thing. And so it was very well received. We had an opportunity afterwards to go to one of the elders' houses and just have fellowship. They spend most of Sundays together. They get together after the service, they eat, and they just kind of hang out at houses and talk about the Bible and scriptures. And so had an opportunity to meet several believers from different countries and have some fellowship and hear more about what God's doing here in the Netherlands and how people are getting saved, and what God's doing in the church. And so it's just a beautiful afternoon. Tonight I need to get some rest. I'm really tired. The jet lag's catching up to me, but I'll start teaching at the full-time Bible school in the morning. We've got 2 long sessions. I'll be sharing my testimony and also about the fear of man in ministry. And so it's going to be a great morning, and I'm thankful for what God's doing. So it's Monday night, and other than a pretty intense jet lag I've been walking through and not sleeping very good last night, we had a really great and powerful morning this morning of teachings with the Bible school students. It's always a blessing because they're always here for, they just spent a year seeking the Lord for the will for their lives and being poured into, and their character being developed. And so now on this final week, they're getting out to go in various directions, some overseas, some to other parts of the country, into various ministries to serve in churches and organizations. And so they're really excited about their future. And so it's a great time to be able to pour into them about what it means to be a worker in God's vineyard. That's the topic for this week. And so this morning, my first session, I shared my testimony in detail. I always like to share what I've been through, because I think I've learned a whole lot about ministry in a good way, and also from my own mistakes. And so being able to share my testimony, what God's brought me through, and how God set me free 12 years ago at Pure Life, and has led to some great questions, but also some great conversations with some of the students about some of the things that have impacted them, and they're reaching out and asking for advice and for wisdom with different areas of their life. And so what a blessing to be able to pour into the next generation. The second session that I did was about the fear of man in ministry. how all of us, when we're serving God, we always have to make choices on a regular basis. Are we going to do this for God's opinion or do this for man's opinion? And about the constant battle that you face in ministry and that spiritual warfare that you have to walk through. And so we had a really great time of study together and conversation. We had lunch together, and then I've been studying this afternoon, had some conversations with students that have been really good, and then preparing for the next 2 days, which will be very busy. It'll be 2 sessions in the morning with the students, about 3 hours of teaching each morning, and then a service each evening. And so just working on getting study together and trying to get those things together. But one of the things that's been a real blessing is being able to connect with students from the past. There was a girl here that I saw at her church yesterday. She was actually here in the Bible school in 2017 on my first trip. And she shared a story with me about evangelism, how she had stepped out in faith and how people had responded, and all because of some of the teaching that she heard me give. Another student from years ago was talking about one of the lessons of a Bible school and how it impacted her view on the crucifixion of Jesus, and how much it caused her to think differently about that. And so to be able to see fruit from even 6-7 years ago of students who still remember what God spoke to them when I was here has just been a real encouragement to know that there's good fruit here and that God's making an impact. And I'm enjoying spending time with this generation of students and looking forward to seeing what God's going to do in their lives in the future, and just believing for this has been a great time of ministry already, and believing for a great week.